Studying for the MCAT shouldn't be aimless, but oftentimes studying for the cars section really feels like that. It also shouldn't cost you thousands of dollars, but unfortunately, that's really been the status quo lately for students that are trying to score high on the MCAT. Today we're going to walk through the second passage of the AAMC CARS QPack, Volume 1, and I'm going to show you how a professional tutor would attack it. Let's jump right into it. So as we jump into this CARS passage, I'm going to first show you kind of how to read it and some of the things that I would be paying attention to as a professional tutor, and also some of the things that I would be trying to get my students to pay attention to as well, because reading for CARS is really different from reading for fun or reading like an instruction list or reading your Bible or something like that. And then I'm going to show you how to take what you're reading, condense it down into a main idea, and then also apply it to answering questions correctly. So let's get right into reading. First thing I always do is I always check the name of the passage. So it is called the Formless Critic. Now, generally speaking, whenever I'm doing CARS, and if you've seen any of our videos of Maggie or myself breaking down CARS, you know that we don't take a ton of notes. We don't highlight at all during the CARS section of the exam. And generally all we write is going to be a very condensed main idea at the end. But when I'm teaching and showing you how to actively read and understand and interpret, I'm going to highlight, I'm going to draw things. Let's go ahead and jump in. So it says the name of this passage is the Formless Critic. Okay, I don't really know what that is yet, but I'm assuming that we're either going to talk about the Formless Critic or criticize them or offer some form or fashion of opinion there. Or maybe we're just being strictly factual, and they're going to tell me what a formless critic is. Regardless, this is the topic, the formless critic. Can't tell if the author is a male or a female. I'm just going to call it a she so that I'm not jumping back and forth and kind of confusing some people. So let's see what she says as we get into it. It says, in the first place, to make the poem or the novel the central concern of literary criticism has appeared to mean cutting it loose from its author and from the author's particular hopes, fears, interests, conflicts, etc. A criticism so limited may seem bloodless and hollow. Okay, so right off the bat, they're kind of hitting us with this really MCAT style language as far as some of it's dense, but a lot of it you can really grasp onto. However, they're going to use a little bit of fancy wordplay to kind of throw you off the scent. And a lot of people will tell you that the MCAT has no trick questions, and that they want you to get every question correct. No, they don't. They want their test to be difficult, and it is difficult. And they do a good job of making it so. But even though it is difficult, it is predictable. And the type of language that they often select for is pretty predictable. So let's kind of go back through this first paragraph a little bit slower, and let me dissect it and show you what I'm talking about. Reading this, it says that we are looking at the poem or the novel, and if we want to make this a central concern of literary criticism, which we probably do since this passage is about the formless critic, then what we're going to have to do is it has appeared. So this means we have good reason to believe that we should cut it loose from the author and from the author's particular hopes, fears, interests, conflicts, etc. Meaning, if I want to treat a piece of literature as, if I want to critique it, then I don't really care about the author, why they wrote it, what they thought it would do, how they thought you would read it. And she goes on to say that a criticism so limited may seem bloodless and hollow. So it may seem bloodless and hollow to remove the author completely from the equation. But let me ask you something. If I were to say, Chick-fil-A may seem to have the best chicken sandwiches, does it sound like I'm about to say, but oh yeah, they do have the best chicken sandwiches? No, right? Like it sounds like I'm about to say, it may seem like they had the best chicken sandwiches, but actually you're wrong. Actually, it's Popeyes or something like that. So they kind of snuck this in, this may seem. Okay, so this author is trying to say, right off the bat, she's trying to say, you may think that removing the author from criticism is bloodless and hollow. I don't think that. So right off the bat, I can already kind of catch a vibe. A, that she's going to be pretty stern and a little bit sarcastic, and B, that she's really just out here for like the work. She really just cares about the literature as a whole rather than the social factors encompassing it. In the second place, to emphasize the work seems to involve separating it from those who actually read it. Okay, so now not only are we taking out the author, we're taking about the people that are reading it. This severance may seem drastic and therefore disastrous. Do you think that our author believes that this would be drastic and disastrous? Probably not, right? It may seem it, but it's not. After all, literature is written to be read. Okay, this is the hardest part of the MCAT, for me anyways, is interpreting sarcasm, okay? Right here, she's being sarcastic. I can tell that, number one, by kind of the setup and this idea of she keeps playing this weird contrast game where she's like, you may think it is X, but I don't really think that, and you may think that it's Y, but I don't really think that. So kind of the setup, and then she gives us this very weird transition. This is kind of like a summative transition, and that wouldn't make sense in the context if she believed it. She would not say, after all, literature is written to be read. She would say, because literature is written to be read. So far what I'm looking at is that she wants to take out the author. She wants to take out the reader. And a lot of people would struggle with that. But not her. She's too good. So we keep going. It says, the Formless Critic knows as well as anyone that poems and plays and novels are written as expressions of particular personalities and are written from all sorts of motives. Oh, we're getting to some weird territory. This is completely different. For money, from a desire to express yourself for the sake of the cause, etc. Moreover, the Formless Critic knows as well as anyone that literary works are merely potential until they are read. That is, that they are recreated in the minds of actual readers who vary enormously in their capabilities, their interests, their prejudices, their ideas. Okay, do you see how she is pandering right here? She is saying, I know, I validate your feelings. I know what you're saying. Like, yes, the reader's important. Yes, the author's important. It's cool what they feel about them. But you can tell that she's setting herself up for a big fat but. And here it is. Whenever I was trying to learn how to do the MCAT, I was not great at cars. I actually had a tutor myself. And he told me, one of the best things he told me is pay attention to transition words on the MCAT. Because anything that follows a transition word, like but, therefore, hence, usually tells what the author's really feeling. It usually gives you a huge clue to the tone. And we've already seen it here because we got that sarcasm. And now we get this huge but. I like big buts and I cannot lie, right? Like we want to pay attention to these transition words because those are going to tell us the tone. So I'm always out for a but because specifically a but tells me that there's a contrast. So you're setting up this snare and then you give me the contrast and that's what you really think. It says, Formless Critic is concerned primarily with the work itself. Okay, so now that they've kind of justified what we've been looking at this whole time. Speculation of the mental processes of the author takes the critic away from the work into biography and psychology. Oof, I think they're kind of throwing shade there. Such studies describe the process of the composition, not the structure of the thing composed. So our author likes the structure of the thing composed. Our author wants to focus on just the work. If you start caring about what the author was feeling or what they had had for breakfast that morning when they wrote the book, you're in the realms of psychology. You're not in literary criticism. So I'm not a highlighter, but if I were a highlighter or a person that highlights, this would be a good sentence for it. Okay. I say that because it seems to be very indicative of the main idea, right? The whole purpose of me reading this passage is just to get the main idea down. Because everything else they're going to tell me where to go to find the arguments. On the other hand, exploration of the various readings which the work has received also takes the critic away from the work into psychology and the history of taste. Okay, so now we're getting into this idea of not only is caring about what the author thought psychology, but also caring about what the reader thinks and feels is psychology. So she's kind of being derogative with her opinion of psychology. But such work, valuable and necessary as it may be, I love this right here. She's trying to be like, I'm not mean, I swear, is to be distinguished from a criticism of the work itself. So, yeah, it's important what you do, but it ain't criticism. The Formless Critic makes two assumptions, okay? So notice that anytime that she's mentioned the Formless Critic, it's held in high esteem. So I believe that she either is a Formless Critic or she subscribes to that field of view, that that's how you properly interpret literature. And we got to make two assumptions to do it properly. One, that the relevant part of the author's intention is what the author actually put into the work. That is, that the critic assumes that the author's intention as realized is the, quote, intention that counts. Meaning, I don't care what the author felt. I don't care what the author meant to say. I care what the author did say. So that's one assumption that we make, that what the author did say is what counts. And number two, the Formless Critic assumes an ideal reader. That is, instead of focusing on the varying spectrum of possible readings, so instead of, and I would stop because that's kind of a lot, I would stop and unpack that. Even though it's not the end of a sentence, I would stop and unpack that. Instead of focusing on the varying spectrums of possible readings, so I think she's probably talking about instead of like trying to figure out different people's reading levels, the critic attempts to find a central point of reference from which to focus on the structure of the poem or the novel. So instead of caring about how other different people may interpret it, we're really going to find a central piece. We're going to find a baseline and judge off of that baseline, and that's how we're going to make it more scientific. Really chasing objectivity here, right? Like, generally when I think of literature, maybe it's because I'm a jerk, I think of like more subjective views and understandings of it because it is like an art form. But our author seems to really be into the idea of objectively looking at literature, and she's really just kind of telling us how to do it. It's kind of a little bit of foreshadowing towards my main idea. There is no ideal reader, of course, okay? So acknowledging the truth, there's no ideal reader, but for the purpose of focusing on the poem rather than the critic's own reactions, it is a defensible strategy. I've seen this passage put like a spin move on a lot of my students before, this sentence right there, because they're confused. They're like, okay, well, you're telling me how important the ideal reader is, and then you tell me that there's no such thing as one. Like, is Santa real or not? Like, who's really giving me my presents? And so I don't think that this should, I don't think that this is contradictory in any fashion, because really what the author is saying is that we make this assumption and we make this assumption right here, and this is why it's a good assumption. So I don't think there's any issue with that. And says, it's a good strategy because the alternatives suck, or are desperate. Either way, we say that one person's reading is as good as another's, or either we say that everybody can read at the same level, which is not true, right? And thus deny the possibility of any standard reading, or else we take the lowest common denominator of the various readings that have been made. That is, we frankly moved from literary criticism into social psychology. There she is again, just throwing shade at psychology. So this is saying that we can either assume that everybody reads on the same level, or we can say that if people read on different levels, we're going to have to take the lowest reading level and use that as the standard, because that is the level that everybody can read at. And I believe that would kind of limit the author, right? That wouldn't be fair to the author of a literary work. So she's saying that's not a great idea. I happen to agree with her, but it doesn't matter what I think. As consequences of the distinction just referred to, the Formless Critic rejects two popular tests for literary value. Okay, the first, so now we're about to get into the tests that are rejected. So keep these distinct from what you think the Formless Critic is. I want you to think, if we're rejecting this, Why are we rejecting this? What is fundamentally wrong with this point of view? The first proves the value of the work from the author's sincerity or the intensity of the author's feelings as he or she composed it. We discount also such tests as the intensity of the critic's reaction. Okay, so the common thread here is this idea that we are trying to stay away from subjectivity. We really just want to focus on things that are real, they're on paper, they're in front of us, the objective things, the objective truths. And so we're not going to bring feelings into it. So that's kind of the common thread. I would not worry about writing these down. These are not big arguments that don't seem to really feel like this is going to be tested on. What's more important is that you get the common thread, and that's really CARS as a whole, right? Like we're really just trying to figure out what is the central theme of this entire passage. And so let's go on to read. It says, literary work is a document, and as a document can be analyzed in terms of the forces that have produced it, or it may be manipulated as a force in its own right. It mirrors the past. It may influence the future. These facts it would be futile to deny, and I know of no critic who does deny them. Okay, so a lot of times the last passage or the last paragraph of an MCAT passage is going to try to kind of like throw you off the scent. They'll offer like a new random argument and hope that you latch onto that as the main idea, kind of taking advantage of like the recency effect. And a lot of times that's a question that gets asked. So you got to make sure to pay attention to the arguments that are in the last paragraph, but make sure that you're reading them and interpreting them in light of the entire passage and not looking at them as like a summary of the passage, because it's not. In real life, if you like Googled, or I don't know if you Google it, if you search this article, this would not be the last paragraph of the essay. So, with that in mind, that's why this all feels like word soup, because this is kind of random, and it's supposed to be a little random, because they don't want you to pay attention, or they want you to be kind of thrown off the scent. But let's kind of break it down piece by piece and figure out what the arguments are. Literary work is a document. It can be analyzed in the forces that have produced it, or it may be manipulated as a force in its own right. So we can say that the author's saying that we can look at literature in light of what helped make it or why it was written, or we can actually see and measure the impacts of literature, right? Like the Constitution had an impact. The Bible had an impact, so we can measure it in terms of those forces and be manipulated as a force in its own right. Now we get into some wordplay. It mirrors the past. It may influence the future. You don't have to worry about like memorizing that. I know the ACT would be like, what does this language mean? Like the MCAT's not going to do that. They're going to ask you to get in the author's head, apply what the author thinks, because you got to do that for patience in a few years, right? These facts it would be futile to deny, and I know of no critic who does deny them. Okay, so we don't really use these for formalist criticism, right? Like this idea, we don't really use it for formalist criticism. So the author does not deny it. It just says the reduction, here again, here's that giant but, the reduction of a work of literature to its causes does not constitute literary criticism, nor does an estimate of its effects. So it's saying these things are real, don't deny it, nobody denies it, but they're not criticism. Good literature is more than effective rhetoric applied to true ideas. Even if we could agree upon some philosophical yardstick for measuring the truth of ideas, and even if we could find some way that transcended nose counting for determining the effectiveness of rhetoric. Okay, this is really wordy. They're pretty much just saying like, good literature is more than rhetoric applied to truth, and she's saying like, we don't even know what truth is, but if we could agree on what truth was, and we could agree on what is good rhetoric past, I guess nose counting is like popularity. I don't know, this is 1951, so like I guess that's what they're saying. It still wouldn't be good enough. So that's the whole passage. So I'm going to kind of throw up the three different stages that I have my students progress in CARS. as far as what these passages should look like. But the one that I'm going to use to answer the questions is the short and sweet method. So where we just identify a main idea. And that main idea, even though it's different on the screen, it's going to be something along the line of the Formless Critic objectively focuses on the work itself. To do so, they assume an ideal reader and that the work the author chose to put in is what counts. It seems to be the central driving home point is that the Formless Critic really only looks at the work. And then I included those other two arguments because they seem like big pillar arguments. They seem to really, really support the main idea. And so I like to include some tone and some really big supportive arguments in my main idea. And so the ideal reader definitely was talked about a lot, right? We got like a whole paragraph and a half on the ideal reader. So it deserves to be in there. I don't know about this first assumption. We'll see. So that's it for the passage. Make sure that you wrote that main idea down because we're going to be coming back to it a lot. And then let's get into the questions. It says, according to the passage, formless criticism focuses primarily on which of the following aspects of a literary work. First thing I always do is put the question in my own words, unless it's like one of those weird ones that's like, what's the main idea? Like, I'm not going to rephrase that. But I will rephrase this. It says the formless criticism focuses primarily on which of the following aspects of a literary work. I would rephrase this as, according to my main idea, which of these is important for the formless critic? Okay. So if I go back and look at my main idea, it's this idea of we're focused on objectivity, we're focusing on the work itself, like the words on the page. And so A says I'm focusing on its effects on the reader. Probably not, right? Because I think our author would deem that as psychology. We're not focusing on the reader. So maybe not A. B says it's author's motivations. This is a similar thing. We don't really care about emotions, right? That's actually one of the two, if you remember, that's one of the two tests that we rejected. So maybe not B. C says it's structure. I like C because that's really what we're focusing on is looking at the work itself, the objectivity, the structure. So maybe C. And then D says the truth of its ideas. Okay, so now it's not D, right? Because we even made a big point at the end that we don't even know what a true idea is. And so C is going to be its structure. That's going to be the correct answer. All right. So this was a main idea question. And I'll do my best to kind of label how you get every question right, because I really want to drive home the fact that like you do not need to be bouncing back and forth to the passage all the time. Some people are really good at it. You'll probably get some comments on this about how certain people are like, I always go back and I made a 130. That's awesome. But consistently, student after student, most students do much better if they just formulate a great main idea and then answer every single question with that main idea, unless the question tells you where to go back to. You know, if a question says, in paragraph 3, they said blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm going to go to paragraph 3. I'm going to answer it off of paragraph 3. But past that, main idea. Implicit in the passage is the assumption that, so this is pretty much just going to say, like, which of these agrees with the passage? A says, some critical evaluations of literature are more valuable than others. Maybe, right? Like, let me put this into an example. Do you think that the author would think that the Formless Critic's opinion was more important than like my opinion? Probably. That was the whole purpose of the passage, is to argue which opinion's better. How should we evaluate literature? So I like A. B says, criticism that dismisses the author's motivations is ineffective. Well, no, that's what the Formless Critic does, so maybe not B. C says the ideal reader is one who has attempted to create a work of art. I don't remember even talking about that. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like something that I would agree with. But again, it doesn't matter what the heck I think. I'm just some redneck. So maybe not C, because it doesn't go with the main idea. And then D says good literature is nothing more than effective rhetoric applied to true ideas. Well, it's wrong because of it doesn't agree with the main idea. But also, if you remember, So this says nothing more, and then this is literally the exact same sentence, just without the word nothing. So you can tell that that's a false statement. So the correct answer here would actually be A. This is another main idea question. All right. Let's go to number next. It says, for which of the following conclusions does the passage offer the most support? Okay, which of these is most supported? So this is, to me, whenever I see one that's saying which of these is most supported, I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking for the main idea or like one of those giant pillar arguments that supports the main idea. And when it says least supported, I'm looking for something that is very far removed from the main idea, something that if that argument were to be false, it would not change my main idea. But we're looking for most supported here. So A says literature is merely potential until it is read. Is that a true statement? Yeah. So I'm not going to rule it out because so far it's my best answer choice. That's pretty supported. B says a literary work can be analyzed in terms of the forces that produced it. Would the author agree with that? Yes. Would the author agree that that is formalist criticism? No. So it's not going to be the most supported because it doesn't really agree with the main idea. The author was like, yeah, it's possible, like it's valuable or whatever. It's just not criticism. So A is better than B. So far my answer is A. C says literary critic must assume an ideal reader. So this is talking about how formalist criticism works and what makes it the best. Okay, so that was very supported. Remember, A, it was in our main idea, and B, we talked about it for like a paragraph and a half right here. So C is better than A. I like C better than A because it's talked about more, which in MCAT world translates to being more supported. It's also more important to the main idea. If I remove this idea that literature is not merely potential until it is read, is more than just potential until it's read, that doesn't really hurt what a formalist critic does. But if I remove the idea that a literary critic should assume an ideal reader, well, that's a huge step. That's like that's 50% of what a formalist critic does. So that really hurts the argument that this is the right way to do it. It's like you're kind of wasting your time. And then D says literary works may mirror the past or influence the future. Okay, that's another one of those things. Notice that's at the end of the passage. Where is it? It mirrors the past. It may influence the future. That's just kind of that like flowery language that doesn't have a whole lot of weight. And they don't go on to speak about it at all. You can even read after it. Like they don't elaborate on that. They don't tell you what it means. They don't tell you how it's applied. They definitely don't tell you how it relates to the main idea. So you can say it's probably not very supported then. Correct answer here would be C. Next one says the author of the passage probably rejects the use of biography and psychology and literary criticism because these disciplines what? Okay. Oh, this one was actually an arguments question. Sorry. So if I'm going to rephrase this question, number next, I'm going to say, why is the author hating so hard? Why does the author dislike biography and psychology? A says she's rude. Oh, no, sorry, I can't read. A says that these disciplines cannot provide any information about literature. Well, that's not true, right? She kept doing her due diligence and just in being like, I mean, it's still valuable, yada, yada, yada. It's just not criticism. So any is a strong word, okay? This is what I call absolute words. Never, always, any. These are absolute words. And on the MCAT, we run from absolute words like the plague. Because Germ-X only kills 99.99% of germs. So what I'm meaning by that is, as doctors, we're trained that there are exceptions to every single rule. And so we need to be aware of that, cognizant of that, and trained for that in advance. And so it starts as early as now. So maybe not A. B says assume that the author's intention as realized is the only intention that counts. Well, that is what literary criticism did. I don't think bio and psych do that. The author's not rejecting that. So maybe not B, because it's not true. C, take into account the entire range of possible readings of a literary work. It seems like a good thing. So it's probably not getting rejected for a good thing. So I'll say maybe not C. And then D says focus on the process of literary composition and not on its product. So this is actually kind of going back to the passage. There was one sentence right here that when we're talking bio and psych, it says these studies describe the process of the composition, not the structure of the thing composed. Okay, so that's why it gets rejected, because we want to focus on the product. Formless critics focus on the product, whereas other disciplines will focus on the process of composition, right? And so that's probably easiest to get with an argument, but it's also possible to get with just straight up main idea, because the main idea is telling us we're focusing on the product. We're focusing on the words on the page, not what the author thinks or feels. So I'll say arguments / main idea, because you could have gotten it with either one. Number next is the author of the passage would be most likely to agree with which of the following ideas expressed by other literary critics. Okay, so most likely to agree with. Okay, so if the author is going to agree with something, really, what the MCAT's asking us to do right now is they're saying, here is what the author thinks in the form of the passage. Internalize, stand, and empathize in that author's position and apply it to a new scenario. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to say which of these is kind of in line with this main idea. That's how I would rephrase it. It says literary criticism cannot be kept independent of the study of the people involved in the artistic transaction. That's what the author's saying we should do. Criticism should be separate. Criticism should be separate from the actual people, right? So maybe not A, or from the author and the reader. B says ignorance of historical styles and usage on the part of the critic can make for ludicrous interpretive errors. Well, the Formless Critic should not really be paying attention to history or the events and the circumstances that the passage was written, so maybe not B. C says when we decide to treat a piece of language as literature, we also decide not to focus on the author's intended communication. I don't love C, but it's the best answer so far, because what it's saying is we're going to draw a hard line. Like whenever we're deciding to look at this piece of language as literature, when we're going to critique it, we're not going to worry about what the author thought or felt as he or she was writing it. So C's okay. I could see a better answer though, so that's why I kind of say maybe or maybe not. It's because I could see a better answer than C. Well, let's go to D. D says literature can be defined as what is taught in English departments. Okay, so that is not a true statement as far as this passage goes, because we didn't talk about that at all. And so D would be the answer choice you would pick if you were like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I really just want to be out of here. I should have gotten a business degree, and you just pick D. C is going to be the correct answer here, not because it's the perfect answer, but because it's the best one that's available to us. And then I believe we have two more real quickly. It says on the basis of the passage, one can most reasonably infer that formless criticism has the capacity to distinguish what? A says valid literary structures from invalid ones. Sorry. This one's a main idea question. I keep forgetting that. This one's going to be a main idea question as well. Because this is pretty much saying, what does the formless critic do? And so, what my main idea is telling you. So, A, valid literary structures from invalid ones. Well, that sounds pretty cut and dry, emotionless. That's the work. So I'd say, yeah, maybe A. B says one possible reading of a literary work from another. I don't love B. Because we are assuming an ideal reader, so we really shouldn't be thinking about that. One author's personality from another's. We're not really taking the author into account, so maybe not C. And then D says effective rhetorical styles from ineffective ones. Okay. If you're thinking, how the heck are these two different? I'm thinking it too. And whenever I was first taking this passage, I was like, okay, I'm thinking that too. Like, I don't really know the difference between literary structure and rhetorical styles. I'm sure there's a difference. I'm just too ignorant to know it. And so I went with A over D because at the end of this passage, they made this big idea about how good literature is more than rhetoric. And so that kind of gave me the only thing that I could base ruling and answer choice out off of, and ends up correct answer is A. So I guess what they're getting at is structure is more like objective. It's really the work, what's on the page and how it's written, and then rhetorical style. Maybe that adds in a little bit too much personality for them or something like that. I don't know. I'm sure somebody has a better explanation for that than I do, but that's one that'll work. And that's kind of always been my approach to the MCAT is there's going to be a lot of people that know a lot more sciences than me. There's going to be a lot of people that can understand these passages and break them down and explain them better than I can, but I can almost get the answers right, because if one door is shut, I'm going to look for a window or I'm going to look for a back door to get into. So there's multiple ways to get all these answer choices correct. And a really good way to study is to take these passages before you watch my videos or mine or Maggie's videos, and then watch our videos as a form of review and see, did I get the answer right? Did I get it right the way that Maggie or John did? And is there a third way to get it right? It's a really effective way to study. This last one says, which of the following statements, if true, would most directly challenge the principles of formalist criticism? Okay, so which of these, if true, hurts my main idea the most? So this is actually a sneaky main idea question. A says the capacity to interpret a work of literature varies from reader to reader. Well, we acknowledge that. We just said that we're forced to make an assumption to accommodate for that. So maybe not A. B says good literature is more than just effective rhetoric. We acknowledge that as well. So maybe not B. C says knowledge of the author's intentions is not usually reliable. Well, we didn't really speak about that, but we are actually discounting the author's intentions for formalist criticism. So that would not challenge formalist criticism because we're already doing it. So we're already doing or acknowledging all three of these. And then D says the social or historical context of a work of literature cannot be ignored. Like something bad happens if you ignore this stuff. And so we are ignoring it. Like formalist critics don't care about the social historical context. And so if it was true that you can't ignore it, well, like we are because we that bad. But also that's going to really challenge the main idea. So answer choice D is going to be the correct answer. And that is it. Comment below. Let me know how you did. Let me know what's helpful about this and what passages you want to see next. And make sure to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel for more.